Lebanese writer that focuses on the Middle East and North African region, with a specific focus on minority rights, especially Kurdish issues. I usually contribute towards a couple of online syndications such as Aria Magazine, the Jerusalem Post, and The Region. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you on. Very happy to have you on. So, originally we were just going to be talking about, what's it called? We were just going to be talking about some Syrian girl, bullshit, basically. We're just going to be, like, making fun of, what was, like, her videos and how, like, dumb they are. But,
Yeah.
then something happened in Lebanon, which I have yet to cover because I wanted to wait till more information came out about why it happened, how extensive the damage was, and other information. And I think I've waited enough to finally cover it. I think waiting any longer, I would be just letting the issue pass me by. So, do you have any initial thoughts about what's going on in Lebanon? And for anybody who doesn't know what's going on, could you explain what happened?
Okay. So on August 5th, an explosion went off at the port of Beirut in Beirut, Lebanon. It has so far killed over 100 people and wounded about 5,000 people. The explosion was caused by ammonium nitrate that went off at a warehouse when fireworks, for some unyet known reason, went off and ignited the ammonium nitrate. Now, the ammonium nitrate was confiscated a couple of years ago from a ship and has been in storage for the last 3 months in this warehouse. It's about, I think, the last time I read it, 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate. And there's plenty of footage you can find on the internet. But it caused such a huge explosion that it's completely devastated the port of Beirut. That's what's happened so far.
Yeah.
It's just large calamity, lot of death, and lots of injuries.
So from what I could tell, it was about, I think, 2,750 tons of it
Yes.
was confiscated and put into this warehouse, right?
Mhm.
Years ago.
That's correct.
It's been like
Yeah.
6 years or an extremely long period of time since this has been confiscated.
Mhm.
Yet it was allowed to be left in an unsecured warehouse where tons of explosives were in. So not only is that dangerous for a multitude of reasons because of why it happened, but also the fact that it was in an unsecured warehouse. It means it was probably quite accessible for like groups that would want to do damage if they wanted to, like, gain access to it. Now, when it comes to this explosion, this isn't the first, like, bad thing that's happened to Lebanon recently. This is just another thing in a long list of things, because right now everybody's just checking into Lebanon, but this isn't the first time I've covered Lebanon on the channel. Lebanon is struck with extreme partisanship, many times along religious lines. It is a complete rejection of technocracy in many cases. The inability for it to deal with corruption, which has entrenched itself deeply in the government. An economic crisis, which have seen the Lebanese people mobilize on the street against the corruption and economic crisis that is set in society. And I'm not just talking like 10% unemployment. I'm talking like 50% to 75% of the population needing assistance due to how disastrous the economy is, how the Lebanese currency has completely degraded, and a complete loss of trust in the, like, foundations of what the government is supposed to, like, do for its people. And then after all of that, and of course the riots and the police clashing with protesters, all of that, then this happens. And I think with that context, it puts it in a completely different light that a lot of people aren't really talking about the long list of things that happened beforehand.
Yeah. My thoughts on this is that what you mentioned so far is absolutely correct. This is not something that comes out of nowhere. It actually is you could say, a symptom of the systemic disease, if you want to call it that way, where the fact that a warehouse, that if you've seen the pictures and the footage actually of the warehouse before the explosion, it was unsecured. and it was unkept. And the fact that for over about 3 months, this large portions of ammonium nitrate was stored in a warehouse without any security or without any just basic any maintenance to make sure that there was not danger to civilians in a very important port for Beirut, because people forget that Port Beirut is one of Beirut and one of Lebanon's largest ports. And the fact that that amount of nitrate was able to actually be used in and kept in that area without no one doing anything about it, it shows you just the level of failure that the system has for ensuring that the public safety is at heart. Because, this is what I was actually watching Hassan Nasrallah, who is the head of Hezbollah, on Memory, who spoke, I don't know, a couple years back about how he would, for example, wish to store ammonium nitrate in a port somewhere, for example, off the coast of Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, and just allow, you could say, nature to do its course. Because what you essentially have is that you have a quarter the size of Hiroshima and Nagasaki going off in the port of Beirut. So that's what you see right there on the footage. When you see that, that's a quarter of the size of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the explosions of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And you look at the destruction, and you can see now what, if you just had to times that by 4, what those explosions would have been like in those places back in the 1945. And you know what's actually quite eerie about this? It's the day that it happened, the day that the explosion happened, it was the 75th anniversary of the dropping of nuclear devices on Japan. So that's a bit eerie to think about in those terms.
This is so interesting. I've saw a lot of just complete conspiracy theorists going off on the internet. Like, Israel just dropped a nuclear bomb on Lebanon, just like people just doing everything possible to completely just muddy the water. But I think you are highlighting the importance of this specific ports to Lebanon, but not only is it a huge center of trade and income for the country, a country right now which is going through a huge economic crisis that is so bad that people are on the streets rioting, asking for any level of just professionalism from a corrupt and incompetent government. But on top of that, it is the area where 80% of the nation's grain stores are located, meaning that during an economic crisis where the majority of the people need assistance and they aren't getting assistance, and now that the ports are now targeted and people are on the streets rioting because of how bad everything is and the government's corrupt and all this stuff, it also happens to occur where 80% of the nation's grain storage is. That is so disastrous. From what I've seen, I think Al Jazeera reported that there's been over $10 to $15 billion worth of damage caused by this, and over 100 deaths now, as more information comes out.
Yeah, the thing I just need to clarify that that's what I need to clarify first for someone in the chat for that. I was just using an example of it being a quarter of the size of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't know if that's exactly the case, but I have read that it was a quarter. Other people say it's a tenth, as the viewer points out. I'll let, of course, the people who are experts when it comes to, you could say, just explosive devices and comparison sizes of explosive devices, because there's plenty of threads that you can find on Twitter or anything of that will buy from people who actually study explosives in general, who could give you a rundown. But the last time I checked, it was a quarter of the size. Now, of course, I could have read that wrong, but that's just my thoughts on that point. But I just also want to mention the fact that, funny enough, is that Emmanuel Macron, French president, has actually recently gone to Beirut and sent civil rescuers, doctors, and dog handlers.
Seeing that is heartbreaking. Yeah. Seeing that people beg Macron for help and assistance and anything.
I wanted to say that also that he's one of the first foreign leaders on the ground in Beirut after this disaster that's gone before the actual politicians that run the country of Lebanon. I'll put that, just shows you right there that the president of France, a country that used to actually be owned essentially Lebanon under the French mandate, has being able to actually come down to the ground and provide support and aid and actually be a representative for essentially a liberal internationalism on the ground over there, whereas Lebanese politicians are nowhere to be found on the ground for their people.
It's wild when you have to, as a person, even if you, because I have problems with Emmanuel Macron, everybody has problems with politicians, but when you look at basically like the corruption in Lebanese politics, the complete disregard for the people's need, the extreme partisanship, the complete lack of any professionalism, the complete gutting of the Lebanese economy. Really, anyone offering their help, people are going to grab at any like image of hope. And Macron, I believe he ended up actually saying, whilst maybe this was because he was caught up in passion, but if he really meant it, I think he remember saying that he will personally do his absolute best to finally try to help build like a coalition type government that can deal with the issues Lebanese people are facing, or, and this is what he said, or he will take personal responsibility for the fallout. Mm-hmm. That is he's putting his neck on the line with that statement.
And that's the thing about it, is that you mentioned a good point on that note, is that Macron is doing something that I've not seen a leader do for a long time. Like, he's doing actually classic politics, because there's a lot of people who will look at Macron's visit to Beirut in a cynical light. They'll think, oh, it's just a PR move and like that. I mean, even if it is a PR move, he's doing politics the old way. Remember when politicians would actually go to places where a calamity happened, and they would personally engage with people on the ground in those areas? Like, he's kind of his move that he did, for example, over here, it reminds me a little bit of George W. Bush's move when it came to Ground Zero. I know it's just an example essentially of going down there where the people have actually been impacted, essentially listening to their calls. And in his passion, he makes a promise to the Lebanese people in French, may I say, because we mustn't forget that in Lebanon they speak French, Arabic, and English. Amongst French and Arabic are probably the strongest languages in the country, as well as a mixture of both. So, what were you going to say?
I mean, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, he did it in Lebanon. It just, maybe it would have been nice to see him do it with the Yellow Vest protests a little bit more. I don't know, but I don't know if they would have been as quick to listen to him.
Well, here's the thing about it. When I just on that point, there'll be a lot of people, and I speak with French friends as well as analysts alike, who will, like me, who may adore Macron's foreign policy, but when it comes to his domestic policy, are a bit more, how can you say, a bit more ruthless in their criticism. Because when it comes to Macron, he is, for all intents and purposes, he's a classic neoliberal when it comes to his domestic policies. Okay, and that has given him a lot of, that has given a lot of criticism towards how he's handled the country in general. Like the Yellow Vest is just one example as well. So in terms of him as a sort of like a sort of someone who represents the liberal internationalism in terms of his foreign policy, I can say for quite certain that he is at heart a liberal internationalist. But if you're talking about his domestic policy, he reminds me again of a neoliberal, like someone I would expect basically 80s Paul Keating or something akin to that of Australia, or something in France basically, where he's actually a bit more, he's not as right as Sarkozy, but he's not as left as someone like Hollande or Mitterrand or something like that.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like, I'll take him over Marie Le Pen any day of the week, of course. But it's just when you look at his domestic policy and kind of like put it against his foreign policy, like it's always confused me, the tie of liberal internationalism, this feeling of being one of the international community and needing to get involved in here and there. But then putting that also against the idea of, but maybe we should not put as much money into these social programs. Like, well, it's always bewildered me, the large scale overlap between neoliberalism and liberal internationalism.
Well, I will give you that, because I have noticed, at least on the Twitter sphere, that we do have a lot of neoliberals who are also liberal internationalists. Now, me and myself, who identify as a liberal internationalist, for those of you who don't know what liberal internationalism is, it's the belief in the ability to build, you could say, a liberal world order where justice and human rights are upheld, and where the need to act when calamity or disaster or war happens on the side of those facing injustice is imperative. Essentially, that's the liberal internationalist motto. It differs to the neoconservative motto, which is more the case of just imposing a system of, you could say, almost like a kind of quasi-American imperialism upon the people. But then we can explain that in a bit more detail a bit later. But to put it down to what Macron's doing over here is that Macron's domestic policies, where they may be neoliberal in attitude, he is still fundamentally, in terms of his foreign policy, quite good on that front. Now, people will mention the fact that he has backed Haftar in Libya.
Is one of my biggest criticisms of Macron is that not because, like, I would say if he had sympathies towards Haftar, the correct thing to do, considering like the UN has asked people not to get involved, and Haftar, he's a tyrant who has who has dumped people into mass graves, would be to just kind of stay out of it and do everything you can to find a peace deal. But he has explicitly backed Haftar.
And on another note, I forgot this as well. It's just came to my mind. Neoliberals give into this kind of, maybe it's a false presupposition. I'll call it a false presupposition, false assumption. That's the word for it. Where they believe that economic liberalization will lead to political liberalization. So what does that mean? That if we just enhance economic trade and economic union and economic cooperation, that somehow will change the behavior of autocratic states to make them more politically liberal, because we're opening up their markets to this, you could say, investment and trade, that they therefore have to start changing because it's bringing in new flow of population, new flow of different
That's
ideas.
why China has adopted, a democratic model, and Hong Kong is perfectly fine, and Taiwan and China now have friendly relations, right?
And that's the thing that you've nailed on the head. That's why I say it's a false assumption, because at the end of the day, it doesn't meet with the reality. Like, this is why, for example, I'm not personally a neoliberal. I'm more of a social democrat in terms of my views of anything. I know we can talk about that some other stream, I guess. But the thing about it is that I just want to get back to the point that when it comes to Libya specifically, when it comes to Macron's backing of Haftar, that really, I have to give him a bit more sympathy than a lot of people do give him, because he's adopting essentially a foreign policy that was given to him from Hollande. And Hollande, back in the 2015 days, backed Haftar as well as other groups against ISIS at the time, whether it be in Mali and Chad and also Libya, as a part of the whole policy of trying to fight ISIS. And these groups, for example, provided a mechanism by which to fight ISIS. However, what came about later, of course, that gave the rise to Haftar. So when Haftar did essentially declare, you could say, attacking on the National Accord, so the GNA, you could say, that's a problem. For Haftar,
for anybody who doesn't know, the GNA is the Government of National Accord, and it's also the internationally recognized government in Libya, but it's also rife with corruption and has a lot of militias that aren't of the highest caliber, you could say.
Yes, and the thing about it is that when it comes to Macron's position, since you have to remember that he's not even been president for 3 years yet. So we've got to remember that he's not been president fully for 3 years yet. The thing about it is that he's adopted this policy from Hollande, and he's doing it as a means, at least from my perspective, he's doing it as a means to stop, for example, Turkey from turning the GNA, which Turkey, by the way, is the main military backer of the GNA in Libya. They're trying to stop you could say, Turkey from entrenching itself in Libya and turning the GNA into a vassal state. So Macron has the view that in order to stop Turkey from essentially turning the state into a vassal state and also having access to another refugee route to Europe, because we have to remember at the end of the day, for Macron, he sees that Turkey taking another route to essentially blackmail the EU even more than it can at the moment is something that he, as a French president and as someone who's already had criticisms against NATO on a lot of points, especially on the Erdogan and Turkey point, he sees essentially, you could say, opposing the GNA and its, you could say, Turkish backing as being imperative. Now, again, I won't agree that the logical thing of backing Haftar is the right move, because as we know, Haftar is a tin pot dictator. He is like literally Gaddafi 2.0 except not as ugly looking, you could say.
Somehow El-Sisi looks pretty in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, okay, like, Gaddafi is like, I don't want to start attacking people on looks. I mean, because I'm not the most
They're
beautiful
dictators.
either.
Who cares? I don't care.
Yeah.
I remember once I called Kim Jong-un like a fatty McFatterson, and someone got angry at me for bullying him. Like, I don't care. If you're a dictator of a country where your people are starving, I'm gonna call out if you're fat.
A curd is a curd.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's fair enough. But the point is that what we're seeing now when it comes to France's move here is that France will continue to clandestinely support Haftar as long as it's a means to sort of like fight against or keep this vassal state from arising. And Macron, you've noticed that Macron won't vocally support Haftar. You notice that it's almost like something very uncomfortable for him. So, for example, if you mention it into an interview with him, he'll shrug a bit. He'll kind of like try to ignore you because he knows that's a kind of like a glaring blind spot of his, liberal internationalism. Is that whole kind of like support for a tin pot dictator who's essentially a Gaddafi.
Yeah, I mean, but by the way, I really like this. Gaddafi looks like a melting wax statue. Now he looks like a skeleton. But besides that, when it comes to that, I mean, it is like a huge it's always been a problem. The idea that considering the world we live in, if you want to maneuver like strategically in the international sphere as a liberal internationalist, some parts of the world you might have to work with some pretty bad characters, right? When it comes to either Haftar, El-Sisi would be another example. Another one would be, of course, the Saudi royal family. Yes. By the way, because of COVID, and I don't know why no one has been talking about this. Remember they were like Saudi Arabia was like, by 2020, we want to make it so we are not completely reliant on oil anymore. And by 2030, we're going to have the whole plan thought out. COVID has completely destroyed that. I think 2030 is completely dead now. But that's completely other topic. But I will put a little bit of pushback on the idea of the French needing to support Haftar. I really think that what I mean, let me just put some pushback from just the idea of well, there's an internationally backed government. Why can't they coordinate with what is recognized as the internationally recognized government of Libya and try to work with them to try to help dictate a future of Libya where they are more sovereign and less controlled by the Turkish government? Why would the solution here be to work with somebody who's filling up mass graves instead?
Okay, that's a fair point of criticism. The only thing I can say is the same reason why, for example, the French are really reluctant to fully back, for example, Turkey when it comes to the Syria issue, because technically Turkey is backing the quote-unquote recognized a Syrian interim government. But as we know, the French don't like the Turks when it comes to that matter. So I assume that there's some overlap when it comes to Libya as well. That's my only speculation, because admittedly, I will say that the policy, I can understand from a counterterrorism perspective, initially why Hollande would be backing some groups to fight ISIS, but now that is over and done with. The French at the moment, I see that they have more geostrategic and geopolitical reasons for, you could say, essentially trying to block Turkey from fully entrenching itself in Libya. But again, it's gotten them into a conundrum now where I think that even though I don't necessarily like the LNA and I don't like the GNA for that matter as well, in terms of if we're talking about a pure, geostrategic perspective, I can see why, for example, Macron would be essentially on the side of Egypt and to a lesser extent the side of the UAE, because you're trying to stop, for example, some form of Turkish expansionism, and also trying to do, as a leader, you could say, because France is one of the biggest leaders within the EU, trying to stop essentially Turkey from having another avenue for blackmailing you potentially in the future, which is something that Turkey and France have butted heads on many times, because you must remember that in the European Union there are only two powers now. There are only France and Germany. If we boil it down to its essentials, they are the Franco-German Union when it comes to the European Union. And Germany for itself is more technocratic and more really is like, if you want to see someone that is very realpolitik and really economic focused, you look at Germany. Germany has such a different foreign policy to France. France has at least some form of idealism. Germany's like cold realism, bureaucracy, technocracy, kind of like who gives a shit about humanity, economy kind of thing. They're like the worst end product, I would say, of neoliberalism, ironically enough. So I think that's I know that doesn't really address fully your you could say your critiques, but I'm trying to sort of understand from the perspective of France.
Yeah, I understand, but I think we should drag this back to Lebanon, because there's some questions in chat explicitly. One of the questions is, what do you think about Lebanon rejecting Israeli aid?
That's interesting, because from last time I checked, and if I even go check just back out just to see if I've actually, I would say that that's actually something that I didn't really know. I'll be entirely honest with you. I didn't actually know that Lebanon rejected Israeli aid. But then again, it does make sense, because you have to understand that there's the whole Hezbollah and whole kind of animosity that has long existed ever since the Lebanese Civil War, and even since the Lebanon-Hezbollah war. The Hezbollah-Israeli-Lebanon war.
Background to that, because a lot of people don't even know that Israel ever invaded Lebanon. A lot of people don't know this.
Okay, so let me sort of put it this way, because I have to give myself a preface on this. I'm going to really speak this in general terms, just to show you that I need to really reread this stuff up. But from what my understanding is that basically Lebanon was engulfed in a civil war. The civil war led to Syria essentially intervening in the late 70s, early 80s. And this led, of course, to Israel intervening in the early 80s as well, on the south of Lebanon, while Syria intervened on the east of Lebanon, some place like the Bekaa Valley. They intervened as well, and you had, for example, other groups like Hezbollah, and these different Christian, Muslim militias versing one another. This dragged on until the late 80s, where it ended in kind of like this de facto peace of some sort. Then you have, fast forward a bit to the 2006 Lebanon-Israeli war, where you have essentially Hezbollah, and you have continued even kind of like Syrian occupation a bit. And essentially this ends up in like Harari, who was formerly the prime minister of Lebanon, Rari Harari, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He was essentially assassinated by Hezbollah. This led to this kind of whole situation where the Lebanese people were essentially angry at the Syrian government, because the Syrian government essentially blamed the Jews and Israel on this death of Harari.
Well, I'm trying to remember. I remember there was this figure, and I always forget his name, but his family is political gold in Lebanon. And he was, I think you might be talking about him. I'm horrible with names. He was killed, and afterwards, there was a lot of I gotta remember what his name was.
I'm sure. Hold on one second, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I think I am butchering his name.
Yeah, it's I forget his name, but I remember he was killed after a year or something into the fighting, and then tons of war crimes were committed in retaliation, and I remember even some of this, and much of the anger when it comes to Israel is the fact that there were troops that stood by and watched it happen and did literally nothing.
Again, this is as I said, Lebanon and the whole Lebanon Israeli war is one of my weaker points. I will admit that. I don't know as much as I could know, but I know that, for example...
Yeah, Jamil. I never knew how to say his name. Yeah, Bashir Jamil. Sorry, I'm really bad with names. I'm bad with names, I'm bad with pronunciations, and I'm bad with reading. I don't know how I'm doing politics, but somehow I'm getting it done.
Okay, as you're saying. Yeah, again, this is, as I said, is one of my weaker points, and I will admit this to the audience that I am not as well read as I should be on this conflict. That's why I was trying to do as general as I can from my understanding of the conflict. But anyway, this anxiety has sort of continued ever since that Hezbollah essentially occupies part of the country, has a de facto control of part of the country, and we all know that Hezbollah, backed by Iran, is one of Israel's, you could say, biggest opponents in the region besides Hamas and other, Palestinian Jihad and all these other kind of groups when it comes to Israeli national security. So it always boils down to that there's this kind of like deep distrust of the Israelis. And so I think the feeling is a bit mutual between the Israeli government and the Lebanese government. It's always been uneasy at the moment. So it's not surprising that they would reject aid. I don't know exactly why the reasons for that is. I can only speculate as to the reasons. Okay. So I hope that does some form of justice to the viewer who asked the question.
No problem. But yeah, there's basically the short answer is the reason why the aid was most likely kind of taken off the table is because Lebanon and Israel have a very contentious history when it comes to Israel's involvement in Lebanese politics and involvement directly militarily when it comes to the PLO, Hezbollah, and their combating of certain organizations which did cross-border raids and such. Now, I actually want to do a full stream on the Lebanese Civil War. I'm actually have a poll out right now where people can vote if I can do the 1948 Israeli war, if I do the Gulf War next, the Yemeni Civil War, or the Iran-Iraq War. So, you know what? Go vote in that.
If you need help with the Gulf War, I can help you with that.
It seems to be winning, so you know what? I might have to call you up on that.
Because actually, I do know the UNSC resolutions. I do pretty know well the history of the Gulf War and the actual, the events of the Gulf War. So I could pretty much help you with that. I would have to just refresh myself as well with a little bit of reading that. So, but basically, to summarize the answer to that person's question, essentially, Israel and Lebanon no like each other. That's pretty much
no likey, yeah. But yeah. So, this is a very broad question. Sure. Who would you put the blame on for this? We could say that it's larger Lebanese corruption. It's the fact Lebanese politicians don't care and they're corrupt or that they are this or that, or they're incompetent, or the partisanship or the lack of action in the district area. But is there anyone we can really really point a finger at, or who are people starting to point fingers at? Because it's been it's happened Tuesday, so it's now Thursday. It's been a little bit. Mm-hmm. What are people starting to say about who are people down on the ground pointing fingers at?
Well, it seems that a lot of the animosity from a lot of people comes towards their government and the poor handling of the situation by their government. We all know that Lebanon has been in a huge economic crisis and a whole political crisis as well. It's gone on since last year. This part of the reason why, for example, the protest began in the first place is because essentially the government wanted to charge messaging on WhatsApp. And that caused a huge, besides amongst other things, but literally the government wanted to charge each person for sending a message. They would have to pay some money for sending a message on WhatsApp, which is completely ridiculous, basically. So you can imagine that people at the end of the day who are in Lebanon, who love their country and love the culture and love the history of Lebanon, they fundamentally just aren't getting good pay. They're unable essentially to live in a decent standard of living. There is no government accountability. There is a huge level of corruption within the government. There is a lot of different forces such as Hezbollah and other such groups who, for example, are exploiting this animosity in order to, for example, fulfill their foreign backers' demands when it comes to Israel and being directing animosity towards Israel, because Hezbollah will always like to blame Israel for Lebanon's state of affairs, okay? They'll always try to do that. We have to always remember that fundamentally what I see from all the calls I heard in the background of the videos when Macron's walking around is that they want safety, they want protection, they want to be able to live in their country with a stable source of income. And at the moment, their government officials are not delivering that. That's the real issue. I think the blame really has to go to the poor mismanagement of the country by the government and the failure of the government's institutions to protect the people. So fundamentally, it's a systematic and governmental problem that needs to be dealt with, as well as you could almost go to the other dimension of trying to deal with entities like Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is also a big issue, because Hezbollah is just stoking the flames and you're like stirring the shit pot basically for the country. So yes.
Okay, so let me read some numbers here on how much the death toll is rising and how much damage has actually been done. These numbers are from Al Jazeera. Yes, I'm owned by the Qatari government. Chill. The death toll is now at 137, with 5,000 injured. There's over 300,000 people who have now lost their homes due to the blast. This is actually part of the issue that people aren't talking about, is the fact that now homelessness in the area, of course, has spiked because people's houses have been destroyed in the blast area. Next, it's the government has estimated losses to be between 10 billion and 15 billion, and investigators are probing alleged negligence in storing explosive chemicals at port. Because I remember originally, when we listened to, I think it was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo or American stance right when it happened, is that we were very fearful that this was a terror attack of some sort. And of course, it's not completely out of reason to think that it might have been, considering how the region is continues to develop. But it seems that this is just another example at the moment, and it looks like, and they're going to probe into it, that this is just an example of the government being completely incompetent, being extremely corrupt, and not doing their job.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, I have no doubt that this explosion was caused by negligence on the part of whoever is running the government sector of dealing with essentially what to do with large amounts of explosives. Well, this is a brilliant idea. Let's put it in a warehouse. I wonder what's going to happen if we just forget about it. Maybe things will just be all kosher, basically. No. It's one of those things where you can say that this is done done negligently. But the problem is that a bigger question is, first of all, where those explosives came from. Like, where did the ammonium nitrate actually come from? Because that's a big question. And who was in charge of essentially storing it in a warehouse? Because literally...
That's important, because I keep hearing that this was something that they confiscated, which makes you think, okay, somebody was trying to smuggle it into the country, right? Because, it's an extremely volatile chemical, right? But that's the only information I've gotten. I've gotten some... I got something here. This is actually about tracing the nitrate. The nitrate arrived in Beirut by accident in 2013 on board a ship. On its way to Mozambique, the ship had to dock in Beirut after technical problems at sea. The Lebanese officials stopped the ship from sailing. Most of the crew left, and its owners abandoned it. The dangerous cargo was offloaded into Hangar 12 of Beirut port. Custom officials sent at least 5 letters to the judicial branch between 2014 and 2017, asking for an order that the dangerous material be removed. They received 0 reply, and over 3 years after the last letter, the nitrate was still in the hangar. So it wasn't... Oh shit, Fortnite ad. So it wasn't that there was literally no opportunity. The government was giving 5 separate opportunities, 5 separate notifications that, hey, this is an extremely dangerous cargo being stored in a inappropriate manner. This is very dangerous. Please move it. And this is after a very strange case where the ship was abandoned and the crew just dipped it on its way to Mozambique in Beirut. And the government's giving 5 separate warnings. And it's been 3 years since the last warning, and they not only did they not do anything, they didn't even respond to it.
That's something that is, but that right there, I would call on an investigation into that.
Yeah, they're probing into it, but it's almost downplaying it to say that's incompetence. That's almost a complete inability to function as a government or state when you can't do something as simple as that. And you've been given so many opportunities over such an extensive period of time.
Well, can I just say that I will always employ Occam's razor where there is no evidence at the moment to suggest foreign interference with this. I will say that the whole fact that ammonium nitrate was there for so long is quite suspicious, and actually is to me, I still believe that there is just it's government incompetency, basically. But again, it would be interesting to know why the nitrate was there in the first place, why it was stored for so long, and why, for example, there was no response by it. That right there requires a government probe, because whoever is responsible for that needs to get fired and potentially have to face damages, essentially, and have to explain to over thousands of people why their homes and why, for example, their brothers and sisters have been killed. Because that's what because this is not the first time that kind of stuff can happen, because it's always the case, like you have groups like Hezbollah, for example, who will try essentially ship ammonium nitrate to a warehouse somewhere and then just allow, for example, negligence to result in quote unquote an explosion. Because it is like, as even goes back to what Hassan Nasrallah said on Memory, basically on his Hezbollah state TV, basically in Lebanon. He said that, if we ever had to plan an attack on, for example, Israel, this is just to use an example, we would, for example, send ammonium nitrate to a place and essentially allow God's will to happen, and then boom, basically. In other words, that this stuff, whoever is responsible for it needs to be held to account, and whatever the result of the finding may come back in, because as we're going to see in a couple of weeks' time, because this is also another thing that people...
This is the thing, though. If we're talking about we need to hold these people to account, but it's been over such a long period of time, you need to be holding so many different administrations in Lebanon and people involved in administrations to account for not acting. I mean, this happened in so that means like Lebanese administration since 2013. So doesn't seem like, well, it's this administration's complete fault. It would just be completely almost systemic of like Lebanese politics, Mm-hmm. It's just one after the other, after the other, after the other, of doing literally nothing. Nothing. After giving, now you could say the most recent, maybe you can make an argument of it's been 3 years since they've gotten a notification, so maybe they forgot about it. But that's a pretty piss poor excuse for something like this to happen.
I know, but what my whole point is that if we can put into the context of Lebanon, I could say, we can look at the fact that poor infrastructure, poor governance, it's not hard to logically from that go to the conclusion that, okay, if this was in a storage, I mean, I can actually see, for example, nothing being done about it, because just by the whole fact that the government is not running correctly and it's not functioning at optimal level that usual other countries do, like not doing the proper checks like that. This is me saying the simple thing. I'm not saying that there is no foreign interference, but as someone just will take Occam's razor, basically, the most simplest explanations often will suffice in the absence of evidence, for example. So I would say that if an investigation comes around and actually we find out who the true people are, then we have at least evidence to say that, okay, it's these people here. But the problem is that we must make sure that this is not used, for example, by political parties, whether it be in Lebanon or elsewhere, to essentially assume war. Because a lot of people have reason, for example, within this being government people as well, like even Trump, for example, said that, his general said that it could be a potential attack, even though we know that that's not true, basically. It can still be used as a mechanism to push forward a policy that could result in conflict. That's the thing that we have to watch out for here. Because at the moment, this is all a fog of war at the moment. We don't know, we don't have the full extent of the details on this, basically.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like, that's the reason why I waited, is I thought more details would come out, and the only details we've gotten so far is where the nitrate seemed to have come from, and the fact that the damage is extremely extensive, and this is going to
I want to also mention something quickly as well, that, funnily enough, a UN-backed tribunal is investigating the death of Rafiq Hariri, who's the father of Syed Hariri, who is the former prime minister and one of, you could say, Lebanon's great prime ministers, you could say. A UN-backed tribunal, and this is from Arab News, by the way. I'm just going to read just a bit of it. A UN-backed tribunal said Wednesday it had suspended the verdict on the 2005 murder of former Lebanese Premier Rafiq Hariri following the deadly blast in Beirut. The court's decision was due on Friday, but the ruling has been postponed until August 18, the court said in a statement. So what was going to happen is basically there was going to be an investigation into who exactly the perpetrators were, who committed essentially the assassination of Rafik Hariri. We already know that it's Hezbollah, but the people that are essentially going to go to The Hague are more important individuals that are going to be essentially investigated as to their participation in the assassination. That was actually due to happen tomorrow, essentially after, you could say, the day the explosion happened, but of course it was postponed also. So it's very interesting as well what may something have, if that has anything to do with it at all. But it would be interesting to see what we find out about this explosion in the end, essentially.
I do want to say I have some background footage just playing of like Lebanese history, Lebanese politics, where all these protests are from, and it just thing came up. By the way, Lebanon has the third largest debt to GDP ratio in the world. So if you need any more just factors as to why this is just piling on the current crisis Lebanon is in, I think there's no better example than having one of the highest debt to GDP ratios in the world right now.
I think that when it comes to Macron's suggestions of a political pact essentially with the government in France, I'm hoping that France will at least send more aid workers than it has sent now. But I will caution it on not sending troop presence, because that would be kind of like reminiscent of more colonial-esque kind of measures. It has to sort of like balance its, you could say, the amount of forces that it will be putting into Lebanon to help in this kind of humanitarian crisis. But I'm glad that France is acting and doing something about it.
I'm happy I've seen a lot of people offer aid. I'm also happy that the diaspora, the Lebanese diaspora, is going to be able to at least act as somewhat a financial connection to Lebanon, and be able to send help in some manner. And I see the diaspora mobilizing in a big way to send help to the organizations that need it, because a lot of people are just throwing money haphazardly at whatever in Lebanon. And the problem is a lot of the money will be converted to the Lebanese currency, which is actual, it's like toilet paper at this point because it's been degraded so much. Where I think if you want to donate to anything, it should be the Lebanese Red Cross, by the way. I think that would be the best organization to donate to at this point. They will actually use the money and put it towards the things it needs to be put towards. Everything else at this point I think is kind of risky, considering how much shit's going up in Lebanon.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you think what kind of impact is this going to have on the future of Lebanese politics?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's a big question. Well, here's the facts. Literally, that explosion has destroyed most of the port, one of Lebanon's most important ports. So there's going to be economic ramifications on top of the already existing economic ramifications from the protests and from the COVID response in the country. So this is only going to pile on to the economic crisis that already exists. As for the political situation, I do think that most likely, if Macron delivers on his promises, I hope this is the start of trying to rebuild the government of Lebanon in a way that can serve its people again. Because the fact of the matter is, the protesters are right. There needs to be a change of pace. Things aren't working. Things need to change. And if they don't change, the country is just going to remain a failed state for the near future. And Lebanon is losing its young population. A lot of young people are immigrating onto other countries, because who can blame them? If at the end of the day you're not getting good money, or if you don't actually have any potential future in your own country, I mean, it's understandable why people will immigrate. That's why immigration happens, especially from these countries, is because there's no opportunity anymore, especially for young people or old people, whoever wants to immigrate. I think that fundamentally the future of Lebanon, I think despite all the stuff that I've said and all the kind of like the rather, bleak speculation they have on the projection of the country, I think that if France delivers, we could see the rebuilding of the country's government. I do think that the economic situation will need essentially investment from foreign countries, because at the moment, Lebanon's not going to get any form of improvement on its economic situation without foreign assistance. I believe that just like you could say, to a lesser extent, something needs to be done about Hezbollah. That's for sure, because that remains a problem for the country. Because we have to remember that despite Hezbollah having popularity amongst the more Shia fundamentalists within the country, we also have to remember that the Lebanese army is trying to deal with the problem of Hezbollah as well. And part of the reason why Harari resigned out of course, the whole protest movement like that is he was trying to essentially also to crack down on Hezbollah as well. Unfortunately, he had to resign because of sort of the protesters' demand for essentially representative government. Fundamentally, the government needs to listen to the people. If it doesn't listen to the people, guess what's going to happen? It's going to keep spiraling out of control until you have a potentially like almost calamity occur that's greater than this, even potential new war or anything like that. But it's too far to speculate. All I can say is that I'm very cautious and very cautiously optimistic. I think Lebanon will get better in the long run. However, it's going to be a while before it gets better. I think that's my speculation as to the future.
Can I read you a quote?
Sure, go for it.
No minister knows what's in the hangars and containers, and it's not my job to know. That's from the Public Works Minister. This is a sentiment that's being shared by anybody that would have any responsibility for the action, as port official, judges, and public officials just are basically throwing blame at each other and not at anyone, and no one's taking the blame, for example. So I think that when it comes to people actually getting the blame here, or like there actually being like a conclusion like it's this person's fault, it's going to have to be an independent investigation where it's extremely transparent, and it can't be something where it's done behind closed doors and they'd come out one day and say, well, it was inconclusive. It has to be extremely transparent if they want to get any respect when it comes to like the people believing them when they come forward with a conclusion, because it seems that nobody is willing to take the blame here.
That's a bit frightening, but not to be surprised by Lebanon's already corrupt politicians. It's a sad state of affairs, I think. That's why I say that foreign, you could say, help as well as closer. I think if France, for example, participates more in actually trying to help reform the society, because Macron said that the country needs reform, Lebanon needs reform. It needs reform to its institutions and system. Because at the moment, it's not transparent, it's corrupt, it's a broken system. So you got to fix the broken system. And I'm all for that. Yeah, no, people don't like, for example, a lot of people say, oh, the French should not be meddling in the affairs of the Lebanese government. And I say, like, I'm sorry, guys, but if the French are going to help give the Lebanese people an opportunity to actually try build the government that they want, I think that the French participation is necessary and justified in that instance. Yeah.
I mean, it's my opinion of, like, it seems like nobody should meddle in Lebanese politics because nobody can do it. Lebanese politicians, Israeli politicians, Assyrian politicians, it seems to just keep failing, but that doesn't mean we should ever stop trying. I think the international community does need to get involved in Lebanon. But that doesn't necessarily mean we put troops on the ground. It seems like when anybody hears, we need to get involved, immediately everyone's like, oh, so we send in an army. No, that's not how getting involved always works. We could.
Well, can I just sorry to interject, and I have to address one of the Twitch viewers who's kind of playing a little bit of apologetics for Hezbollah. I will actually have to say to this person who's playing apologetics for Hezbollah, I want you to try apologize for the deaths that Hezbollah has caused to so many Lebanese people with its irresponsible terrorist acts against Israel and its irresponsible war against not only its own Lebanese people, but also against other states and involvement in the persecution of other people within other countries. If you're saying that I'm essentially playing empire propaganda, I mean, then I guess anything that I say that is anti-Hezbollah will be immediately interpreted as empire propaganda. What I'm calling for when I say that France should be more actually active in helping in Lebanon. It's not. I'm not calling for essentially French colonialism, where France comes back in and says, "Okay, this is France 2.0." Basically, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that basically you have to recognize that when your government, your system of institutions does not work properly in the country, you can't pretend as if essentially, unless we just like naturally go about things business as usual. Fundamentally, unless the people rise up and actually do something about their government, if they don't do something about their government, and they call for the aid of other countries, then other countries should provide that aid to the people, because fundamentally the people are asking them, please help us fix our government and please help us fix our system. So here, this is what I'm saying at the end of the day. I'm not calling for French imperialism. I'm not calling for empire. And quite frankly, I will not take an Hezbollah apologist's word for anything other than that, because you're an apologist for tyranny if you do support Hezbollah. That's all I will say.
Damn. Well, you definitely went hard. 1 second. I'm going to drag somebody in. It's Endernax, who, this is a special treat, who wants to sing the national anthem for Friday's show, but I got to make sure he's got a decent singing voice before I approve that. Would you like to be seriated right now? Would you like to hear a little ditty?
Sure, go for it.
Sure, yeah, why not? Hey, Ender, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going, Dylan?
It's going okay. We're talking about Lebanese politics, so,
I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, you said you're gonna come in here and sing the Lebanese national anthem, right? Come on, get at it.
I've sung that several times in my life.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna do great.
Yeah, you're real active in Lebanese politics.
Yeah.
I mean, don't you have deep things of the Jamil family? Don't you have deep ties to them, right?
Yeah, I actually own several banks in Lebanon.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, then, screw you for not giving people the money that they own, and you're not letting them withdraw it right now, and the economic crisis that the banks have helped cause. What's wrong with that? Why'd you do that, man?
I just hate poor people, mask off kind of moment. I really just hate. Yeah, I think everyone on this planet, no one deserves to live.
Well, you know what? If you're connected in Lebanese politics, that seems to be the case always. So anyway. Sing the national anthem. Okay. Wait.
Am I just supposed to sing without the music? Like here's the lyric video I'm gonna use. Along with the music. So I mean, if we could somehow sync this up, I don't know how we're gonna do this. But.
So you basically want Oh, and thank you, Blinger, for the Twitch Prime. I really Pog Twitch Prime. Thank you so much. And let's see if we can do you know how to share screens on Discord?
Yeah, we could do that.
If you do that, then I'll have the audio come in, and we can and I'll just play American flag fluttering in the background.
Cool. All right, we will do that.
Okay, YouTube. Oh, and this Anthony. This is Endernax. This is Anthony. Anthony is a contributor to Jerusalem Post. He talks a lot about like Kurdish issues. Cool dude.
Oh, hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Wow, look at this, a meeting of the minds. American.
He's probably much smarter than I. All right. Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, let me just click in there quick. Let me propagandize my chat with patriotism. Okay.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, I'm ready.
Base and red pill.
I'm ready.
All right. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam, whose broad stripes and bright stars who the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watch that so gallantly streaming. When the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in there, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
God bless America.
God bless America, everybody.
Yeah.
Hey, how was that?
Besides a little audio trouble within the middle where you started to sound a little robotic, besides that, but you know what? I think a techno version of the national anthem's also appreciated.
Okay.
I think it went pretty cool. I mean, Chad is tearing into you, but I thought
that's okay.
this was great.
Well, listen, buddy, that's what happens. When
I mean, that's Chad. I mean, who ever wants to listen to Chad? Let's be honest, right?
That's true. That's true. I don't know why you would ever listen to chat. They call me mean names all the time. So
that's true. That's true. So thank you for coming in here and singing the national anthem. I will allow you to sing the national anthem before the Hippie Dippy podcast in a moment of enlightened centrism.
Based. All right. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, buddy. Hey, have fun at the debate tonight with Sushi and Prime. See you, chat. You guys suck.
No problem. See ya. Wasn't that great? Wasn't that wonderful?
I'm a bit confused, but I'm just gonna say, okay, that was great.
You're confused why that happened? You're like, why did a man just wander in here, sing the national anthem, and then leave?
Like, that's exactly.
What does this not happen?
I don't know.
Does this not happen in Australia? In the middle of your conversations, you don't just break out into the national anthem?
I don't think most Australians know their own anthem, to be totally honest.
Wow, I can't think of every American basically knows the national anthem that I know of at least.
Yeah, man.
Well, to be fair, we also play it before like every major event. Like, I'm pretty sure like the grand opening of the Whopper, they played the national anthem or something. I don't know, man. We play it everywhere. Anytime we can play it, we play it.
Well, to be fair, we played at sports events and that kind of like ceremonial stuff, but. Again, it's like, your guys' patriotism is at a different level to Australian patriotism. Let's put it that way.
True. Anyway, man, is there anything else you wanted to comment about Lebanon?
Not really. It's just I was just surprised that I actually got like Hezbollah Stan, and then someone like Hezbollah Stan as a viewer, and then I also surprised that someone like accusing me of playing apologetics for. Like PKK and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, Hannibal, I know you got a mic. Do you want to come in here?
God.
Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? We got 20 minutes. We have 20 minutes. Why not? I lost 30 viewers during the national anthem. You guys, wow, unpatriotic. I can't believe all of you. Unpatriotic. I can't believe you guys.
Well, you know, I'm accused of a lot of things. I mean, I've been accused by Saudi apologists for being a Mossad. I've been accused of, you know, like essentially people like, you know, I'm PKK apologists. I've been accused by people that I'm a Sadist, even though I'm not a Sadist. Like, it's just like I get accused of all these different names. It doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. It's just usually like I just get a bit annoyed at times when essentially people play a direct apologetics for like Hezbollah, which is like that's a bit like it's just like an extreme measure where I'm like, okay, holy crap. Like I've heard, like, for example, I've spoken to many Lebanese people, for example, who are sympathetic, who have given their family members essentially to Hezbollah, the fight against Israel. And they're very sensitive on the topic. You kind of like don't mention that around them. But then again, I've talked to Shia extremists where I say that, you know, how does Hezbollah representing your cause, where in a sense Hassan Nasrallah himself is a corrupt goon who would not give a shit if Lebanon burned, but he could still keep his money essentially. That's like what it amazes me how you'll get Hezbollah stands who, when Hezbollah just wants to turn Lebanon essentially into an Iranian puppet state. That's all they want to really do, and get money from the Iran government for it. So yeah.
Man, I'm trying to find that clip you shared of Emmanuel Macron. I wanted to play a few of these on stream quick before. Sure. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to really talk about Syrian partisan girl, but I think this is probably more important considering everything that's going on. So let me play these clips quick. Please help us, shouts a Lebanese man to French president.
Can I just also say to I'm going to stop ignoring. I'm going to ignore comment basically, but I'm going to just say, if you're saying essentially that the motion was justified because somehow the port does some trade with the US, then I'm going to say you can go fuck yourself, mate. I mean, if you're listening,
what is justified? What is justified?
Like he literally is trying to say, I'll read his thing basically saying that corruption is a propaganda word. All governments and people are corrupt everywhere. It's used to enact political objectives. They're going to loot the country, enact reforms in the interests of the West, crack down on resistance forces like Hezbollah, strengthen the empire-Israel occupation. So much of what the guest said correlates exactly with the goals of the empire. The port is run by the Lebanese Army Intelligence, which works very closely with the U.S. government. So that's the subtext of that is basically the explosion was justified over there because, hey, guess what?
I don't know if he said the explosion was justified.
Oh, it's a subtext, man. It's basically a subtext over there.
I think what he's trying to do is shift more of the blame away from like corruption in Lebanon and more to like the military in the West and saying the West are using corruption as a way to just slide in there, which of course I disagree with 100%. The idea that like corruption is like one of the biggest issues in Lebanese politics. It has been for decades. I mean, corruption's an issue in basically every country, but it's an issue of extent. For example, every country has a problem with fire, right? If a house catches fire, it's a problem. But Australia has a special problem with fire that's a little bit more extensive than other countries. And so when someone brings it up, like saying, well, everyone talks about like how fires are bad in their country. Well, yeah, but the difference is in this country, it's a lot more extensive, and the problem surrounding it are a lot more extensive in this particular country. And when it comes to Lebanese politics, corruption is a huge issue. They have an extremely large debt to GDP ratio. Their economy is literally currently in the shitter. The people need assistance. They are rioting due to the amount of how garbage the economy is. The Lebanese currency is also just bellowing up, like is going belly up. Then you also look at how unemployment and everything's just as bad as possible, and it is impossible to say that a huge extensive amount of partisanship and corruption did not contribute to these factors.
Yeah, I will just say that okay, I won't address anything further from that person, but I will just say that there's no reason then, if it's not the subtext of your comment, that then why mention the fact that the port is run by Lebanese Army Intelligence, which works closely with the U.S. government. You're kind of like implying that there's like something else going at the port, and that somehow the subtext reads to me basically that it's almost like sort of like a slippery slope argument to, okay, ergo blowing up that port was quote unquote whatever. It goes to that logic. So I won't entertain that thought anymore. But I find the comments a bit repulsive, to be totally honest. So I'll leave it at that, and we can move on to something.
Wonderful. Yeah, we've got about 18 minutes left. 18 smackaroo minutes left. So I guess we can talk about a few other things before we wrap up. I'm very interested in your take about the American oil companies drilling in Syria and all the hubbub that it has created in northeastern Syria. Yes. I wanted to get you take on this and explain what's going on to chat.
Okay, that's finally some good effing topic that I know well. I'm sorry, that was a bit funny, but anyway, I would say that when it comes to what's happened recently, actually in the northeast of Syria, is that the company, and I forgot the life of me what that company's called. Oh God, it's just like you don't want it's in your brain. That's just like gone basically. Well, anyway, there's a U.S. company that is drilling, that's going to start to essentially buy up the refineries in the Hazaka region and repair those refineries and essentially bring in money to the self-administration of North and East Syria. Now, a lot of the Syrian government will say that the U.S. is plundering its oil, but then again, the U.S. government won't recognize the people's existence within the Northeast. So on that front, I could not give a shit, basically, what the Syrian government thinks. But the thing about it is that the U.S. company is essentially going to start repairing the refineries in the northeast of the country, in the place like Hazaka, is going to start essentially buying up the oil there as well, and sort of like, almost doing like rentierism a bit for the northeast. Some people have said that's a good thing. Like, I've said I think I view it as a bit more positive because at least it brings in some form of money, an alternative form of income to the place that kind of like you could say sidesteps the Caesar Caesar Act, because the Caesar Act, as we know, has been hitting the Syrian economy, and essentially the Syrian lira, I don't know how much it's at the moment. It's a ridiculous price at the moment, but it's impacting the economy negatively. And if you add the whole COVID thing to that as well, it just adds a whole economic calamity to already the economic situation within Syria. So it's hoping that US dollars will be put into the northeast. That way, the country will at least have a different form of source of income, and then that money can actually be redistributed to people that actually need it within the northeast. The opposite side of the argument is that the US is just plundering this and getting all the revenue from it and won't give anything back to the AANES, which I actually find that is incorrect, because the AANES, which is the Self-Administration of Northeast Syria, which is the de facto government within the Northeast Syria, run by the Kurdish-led autonomous government of Rojava, essentially, as well as the multi-ethnic groups within the Northeast, they're going to be getting at least some form of revenue from it. And since it's in US dollars, that's a very good thing, because US dollars aren't going to be hit by the Caesar Act. So in my view, this is actually a good thing, because at least, many people, especially a lot of anti-imperialist critics, will say that, Rojava has sold out to the US. Ben Norton did this whole thing. Like he said, Rojava has sold out to the US. But my thing is this: why can't indigenous people actually have ownage of their own natural resources? Why can't indigenous people, for example, actually work with companies for their own benefit, essentially? Why can't, for example, the AANES actually do deals to help its people and say, okay, we'll bring in this company who's bigger than us to help repair the refineries in the northeast, especially in the Hazaka region. We get a profit from it. They get a profit from it. We can actually try miss the whole Caesar Act's sanctions against the whole state. We can actually survive and help our people. I think that's a good thing. I think the indigenous people of the region who are engaging with that actually are doing a smart thing by that. Now, the exact details of the whole deal is yet to be disclosed. It could be the case that this is to screw the Northeast, or it could be the case that it's not. But I'm more of the opinion that if it's done with the AANES, there's at least some benefit back towards the society. And I think ultimately it's a positive development rather than a negative development. But we'll see how this goes for the rest of the year, in my opinion.
Okay, I do want to ask a few questions, and of course I got to give a little pushback, because even if I agree with you on a lot of these points, first off, what would you say that another argument that could be made here is that the idea of America's decayed relationship with the SDF and the administration in northeastern Syria, of course, is a danger to the security of the SDF, because it allows other nations like Turkey to get more involved and intervene more. And so the more ties we develop between America and the SDF and in the region in northeastern Syria actually can act as a protective measure? Or would you reject that and say that really isn't part of the equation?
Okay, repeat that in more simpler tones, because
our companies working with SDF, does it protect them since America's more involved?
I would say that it does open potentially up to, you could say, business deals with places like Turkey in the near future. However, we have to be cautiously optimistic about that, because, again, this is the Trump administration that's working this. As for many people would like to say that, okay, this is cheating out resources of Syrian Arabs, even though Syrian Arabs, may I just say, for all those in the comments section a bit bitching ammonia at this, there's over 60% of their SDF is made up of Syrian Arabs. And part of the policies that the Northeast has tried to implement within Arab areas such as Deir ez-Zor have been rejected by Sunni conservatives within the area, under the guise that they don't want to bring in, you could say, the more progressive reforms in the country. Now, people say, the Kurdish oligarchs are going to get the majority of these funds, which is absolute rubbish at the end of the day, because they are working with these Arab tribes, and a part of the deals that they make regarding these areas involve Arab tribes. So that's essentially can be rejected from the get-go to begin with. Now, whether or not this is actually going to change the dynamics of Syria is yet to be seen, because, again, the details of this are not yet known. I'm a bit more optimistic on this front. But again, people could argue that the Trump administration could be just doing for pure cynical reasons. But either way, the fact of the matter is that the Northeast needs to be able to actually, you could say, bypass the Caesar sanctions at the moment. That's the most important part at the moment, because the Caesar sanctions, since they aren't having any little additions or changes in the policy at the moment that we can see, even though people are trying to push for that, ultimately, fundamentally, if they get a source of income that is, for example, US dollars and so on, it's much better than the Syrian lira at the moment, because as we know, the Syrian lira is shot. Now, the Syrian government will say, oh, look at the Northeast, they are plundering our natural resources, our resources. But I would say, essentially, back to the Syrian government or Syrian government apologists who try and make this claim, I would say that where were the rights and the benefits given to the Kurds when they were in control? I mean, at the end of the day, we know that the Syrian state, despite maybe many people who are watching this may believe or not, the Syrian state is in a tyrannical state that has always been an Arab, Baathist, you could say, social supremacist system that has run the country and has persecuted the Kurds as well as other ethnic minorities. The fact that these minorities and these indigenous people are able actually to have access to their resources without having to give in to necessarily always all the time Sunni conservatives, who by far have always, if it's not, for example, the Alawites and the Shia fanatics that are ruling the country, it's always the Sunni conservatives, for example, who are pushing and oppressing women within their systems and like that. Where people try to do the third way, they're immediately pushed back by both sides because, oh gosh, they're trying to bring this kind of like progressive reforms or these quote unquote socialist communist reforms into our areas. Well, as you got the other, this Arab supremacist will say, oh, they're trying to bring an alternative ideology that undermines our collective ideology that we've been indoctrinated for a long time in. So to me, I really don't have much when it comes to this issue. My sympathies are always with those people who are actually suffering the tyranny in this hard, calamitous situation that is Syria. And the fact that the Northeast is able actually to do deals in the first place, still do deals. Like, at the moment, the Northeast still exists as a place yet. It's not been conquered entirely by Turkey. It's not been conquered by Sunni conservative fundamentalists, whether they be jihadists or not. It's not been conquered essentially by the Assad regime yet. It has its own little autonomous project going on. That is a good thing. And that's something that needs to continue. Because unfortunately, whether you may have disagreements with the PYD or disagreements with, the different political parties that rule the NES, they are far more better than the other parties that are ruling the country. By far, hands down, no questions asked about that, my opinion.
Wonderful. Okay. I think I'm going to have to wrap this up here since the debate